They laughed. When the deaf bride arrived, until the rancher said, "She is better than all of you." Montana Territory, 1879. A small frontier church on the edge of Deerhorn Crossing, late morning. The church smelled of dust and old cedar, warmed by the late summer sun slanting through stained glass. Townsfolk filled every pew, not with hearts full of joy, but with eyes hungry for spectacle. This wasn't a wedding they came to celebrate. It was a show they came to watch. At the back of the church, the doors creaked open. Elena stood there, small and pale in a modest white dress. Her hands clutched a dried bouquet, the lace gloves barely covering how they trembled. Her hair was pinned back with care, and around her neck hung a silver locket that once belonged to her mother. She took a step forward, and then another. Her face held a smile, not of happiness but of sheer willpower. Her pale blue eyes scanned the crowd, catching nothing but raised brows, tight-lipped whispers, and pity laced with mockery. She couldn't hear the murmurs that curled behind her back like smoke, but she saw the looks, and that was enough. "She can't even hear the vows," someone muttered under their breath. "Elijah's marrying a ghost," someone else said. "No voice, no ears. What's the point?" Elena's smile faltered, but she kept walking. At the altar, Elijah waited, handsome in his pressed vest, jaw tight, eyes anywhere but on her. His parents stood proudly behind him, watching like vultures perched on velvet. The priest opened the book, cleared his throat, and began. The vows were short, customary, but when he turned to Elijah and asked, "Do you take this woman?" Elijah didn't answer. The priest paused. "Elijah?" The groom looked at Elena for the first time all morning, not with affection, not with joy, but with contempt. "I can't marry a woman who doesn't even know when someone says her name." His voice rang clear through the chapel. Gasps erupted. Then, laughter. Elena blinked. Her head turned slightly, trying to catch something, anything. She stared at Elijah's lips, trying to read them, hoping her eyes were wrong. But she saw it again, those cruel words mouthed with pride. She looked to the crowd. People were laughing. Some shook their heads, others smirked. No one reached for her. She turned to Elijah, her bouquet falling from her hands. His mother stepped forward and hissed, "We were doing you a favor." Her knees gave out, and she collapsed to the floor, her dress crumpling beneath her. Her ears heard nothing, but the noise of the world crashing down on her was deafening all the same. And then, a voice, not mocking, not cruel, sharp, loud, angry. "That's enough." Everyone turned. At the back of the church, a man stepped forward, broad-shouldered, sun-browned, with eyes like thunderclouds about to break. He wore no Sunday suit, just his worn ranch coat and dusty boots. But he moved with authority, each step echoing like gunfire across the pews. Colt Brenner, the widow rancher, a man of few words and fewer smiles. He walked straight to Elena, crouched beside her. He didn't speak at first, he just reached out, gently helping her up. She looked at him, eyes wide, lips trembling. He took her hand, then turned to the room. "She is better than all of you." Gasps again. Colt raised his chin. "And I will marry her, now." No one laughed, no one moved. Even the priest stood frozen, book trembling in his hands. Elena looked at Colt, trying to understand. She couldn't hear him, but she saw it in his face. He meant every word. He wasn't offering her pity, he wasn't saving her for show. He saw her, and he stood with her. In the silence that followed, something shifted. Not in the crowd, but in her. Her chin lifted, and for the first time that day, her smile was real. The church had never been quieter. The tension that followed Colt Brenner's words hung thick in the air, heavier than the scent of wood polish and wilted flowers. For a long moment, no one spoke, no one dared. Even the preacher stood frozen, Bible still in hand, eyes darting between the tall rancher and the girl with trembling hands. Elena stood like stone, her mind spiraling. Her heart pounded in her chest, not from joy or fear, but confusion so total it left her dizzy. She could not hear the silence, but she could feel it. She could feel it in the stillness of bodies, in the burn of eyes staring at her, like she had suddenly transformed into something other than a woman betrayed. Then he stepped closer. Colt's hand, calloused and warm, reached for hers. She flinched, unsure, but he didn't pull. Instead, he gently turned her palm upward and traced something with his finger, slow and deliberate. Safe now. Her lips parted, her eyes flicked to his. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't pitying. He was steady, rooted, like the kind of tree that didn't fall in storms. The preacher finally cleared his throat. Do you mean to marry her? Right now? Colt didn't look away from Elena. Yes. The preacher hesitated. Mr. Brenner, I'm not sure if this is... I said yes. Colt's tone held no room for argument. Elena's brows drew together. Her fingers gripped her bouquet tighter. She looked back and forth between Colt, the preacher, and the rows of faces that still burned with judgment. The man who had shamed her, Thomas, shifted on his feet in the front pew, jaw clenched. This is ridiculous, he muttered. She doesn't even know what's going on. Colt turned toward him, voice calm but sharp as broken glass. And yet she's more decent than you'll ever be. Gasps rippled again, but he ignored them. He turned back to Elena. Slowly, deliberately, he pointed to himself, then to her. He mimed a ring around his finger. Her breath caught. Her head shook slightly, unsure whether to believe, whether she was even awake. But something about his presence, his calm, made her want to believe. The preacher, unsure what else to do, opened his Bible again. Then by the power vested in me, he began, his voice thin, I pronounce you husband and wife. No one clapped, no one smiled. There was only silence, real and imagined, as Colt gently took her hand and led her down the aisle. Outside, the wind had picked up. The gathered crowd parted, whispering, some shaking their heads in disapproval, others watching as if it were theater. Elena didn't meet their eyes. She couldn't. Her mind was a storm. Her fingers trembled in Colt's grasp. She could not make sense of any of it. Why had this man, this stranger, stepped between her and shame? What did he gain from this? They walked past the wagons, past the rows of disapproving townsfolk. Colt's jaw was set like stone, but he didn't look back at them. He helped her mount his horse with quiet ease, his touch gentle, never lingering too long. When they were seated, he clicked the reins, and they rode. The sun was high. The trail was dry. Dust kicked up in waves behind them. They did not speak. They could not. Elena watched the horizon blur past, her thoughts louder than the silence. She thought about the faces in the church, the laughter she could not hear but had seen in every cruel smirk. She thought about Thomas's betrayal, about the cold flash in his eyes when he tossed her aside. And now, this man beside her. Why? The ranch was wide, sprawling over soft hills and fenced pastures. When they arrived, Colt helped her down without a word and gestured toward the house. She followed, dazed. Inside, it was quiet and clean. Worn furniture, a warm fire, a home. He pulled out a chair for her, motioned toward the hearth, then scribbled something on a small slate by the table. He turned it toward her. You are safe here. Rest. No one will harm you. Her throat tightened. She nodded faintly, unsure whether to cry or collapse. He gave a short, respectful nod, tipped his hat, and stepped out of the room. Alone, Elena sat by the fire, clutching the blanket he'd placed over her shoulders. The warmth seeped into her bones, but not far enough to chase the doubt curling in her chest. Why had he done it? Why her? For now, there was no answer, only silence, and a stranger who had offered her dignity when the world tried to take it away. The ranch house was still. Mornings came with golden light spilling through tall windows, painting soft patterns on wooden floors. Elena moved through the halls like a shadow, quiet, unsure where she belonged, unsure if she belonged at all. Colt had made no demands, issued no commands. He simply showed her the kitchen, the porch, the spare room with the small writing desk and fresh linens. Then he left her be. No words, no pity, just space. She found herself drifting, sitting for hours at the wide front window, watching the wind ripple through the grass like a sea of whispers. She could not hear the creak of the house or the chirp of the birds nesting in the rafters, but she felt them in the rhythm of light and movement. In the hush of the land, her thoughts turned inward. Was this silence a kind of prison, or had it always been her companion, faithful if cold? One afternoon, in a drawer of the writing desk, she discovered a small leather-bound notebook and a charcoal pencil. Her fingers hovered over the blank page. Then, in halting strokes, she wrote her first message since the wedding. "You didn't have to, but you did." She left the notebook open on the desk and walked away, unsure if he would see it, unsure if she wanted him to see it. That night, she barely slept. When morning came, sunlight lit the room with a soft fire. She returned to the desk and froze. Beside her words, another page had been added, a sketch. It was simple, the outline of an ear, cracked through the center, imperfect. A dark line crossed it out. And beneath, in rough handwriting, "You hear more than most." Elena stared, her breath caught. She sat down slowly, tracing the lines with her fingers. The message struck something deep within her, something wordless. Colt had seen her, not with eyes full of sympathy or discomfort. He saw her. Tears welled up, unbidden. They spilled silently down her cheeks. For years she had watched mouths move around her, read lips and guessed intentions, and still never felt heard. Now, in a handful of charcoal strokes, a man who barely spoke had told her she mattered. She bent over the journal, hands trembling. A sob escaped her, not from pain, but from the release of a weight she hadn't known she carried. She wept, not loudly, not desperately, but deeply. She didn't hear him enter. She only noticed the shadow stretching across the desk, then the soft scrape of boots stopping nearby. Her head lifted. Colt stood there, hat in hand, saying nothing. Their eyes met. She did not hide her tears. She did not wipe them away. Colt stepped closer and knelt beside her. He reached for her hand, not to take, but to offer. His grip was warm and firm, like the earth after rain. No words, no question. She curled her fingers around his, and for a long moment they remained there, two souls suspended in the quiet, the unspoken, the understanding. In that silence, Elena no longer felt invisible. She felt heard. The days began to soften, not with grand gestures or romantic declarations, but with simple routines, with glances held a second too long, with small acts, a blanket folded at the end of a couch, a cup of warm tea placed without a word, a door held open when it didn't need to be. They spoke in fragments, in gestures, in a quiet that had become its own kind of music. One late afternoon, as the golden light spilled across the wooden floorboards, Colt returned from town with something wrapped tightly in brown paper. His boots were muddy, his shoulders tired from the long ride, but his hands were careful as he set the package on the table. Elena sat nearby, journaling as she often did, her pen moving slowly across the page. She paused, looking at the package, then at him. He didn't say anything. He only nodded once, slightly awkward, before stepping back. She peeled away the paper, revealing a worn but sturdy book. Its title, though handwritten and smudged, was unmistakable. American Manual Alphabet and Signs, Beginner's Guide. Her breath caught. She looked up, her eyes wide. Colt stood with his hands in his pockets, pretending to examine something out the window. But the set of his jaw, the tension in his shoulders, he was nervous. She pressed the book to her chest and smiled. Not the timid, polite smile she gave strangers. Something deeper. From that night on, the book lived beside the fire. Every evening after supper, Colt would sit beside her, back straight, lips pressed tight in concentration. He practiced slowly, his fingers stumbling, gestures stiff. But he didn't give up. Elena corrected him patiently, sometimes covering her mouth to hide a silent laugh. She guided his hands gently, and he let her. The wall between them thinned day by day. He learned to say her name. She taught him how to ask, "Are you cold?" and "Do you want tea?" and "Good night." But what mattered more than any word was how he watched her, fully, without distraction. When she signed, he didn't just see, he listened. And when she faltered, unsure of how to express a thought, he waited without pressure. One evening they sat on the porch beneath a quiet sky. Stars blinked into view, and a breeze stirred the tall grass beyond the fence. Elena's hands began to move, slow, measured, each motion deliberate. She told him about the day her father locked her in the horse stall. She had been 8, restless, unafraid, often labeled difficult. One evening, she hadn't come when called, not because she was rebellious, but because she hadn't heard her mother's voice. Her father, convinced she was disobedient, dragged her to the barn, tossed her into the stall like an unruly animal, left her there in the dark. The hay smelled of rot, and mice scratched beneath the boards. Her hands slowed, her chest rose and fell unevenly. She couldn't finish. Colt didn't speak. He stood, walked inside, and returned moments later with a slate board and a stick of chalk. He wrote something, turned it toward her. "You don't need ears to hear the truth. You've always seen it first." Elena blinked. The words didn't demand pity. They offered something more sacred, recognition. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the slate, reading the message again. Then she looked at him, really looked. She reached for his hand, not as a thank you, not as a plea, as a choice. She curled her fingers around his, and he didn't pull away, he held on. And in that quiet touch, that shared breath beneath a canopy of stars, they found something stronger than sound. They found a beginning. The market square buzzed beneath the mid-morning sun, alive with the clamor of town life. Merchants shouted prices over barrels of apples and woven baskets filled with golden corn. Children darted between carts with sticky fingers and bare feet. Horses neighed from where they were tethered, stamping impatient hooves against sun-warmed stone. The smells of cured meat, dust, and fresh bread tangled in the air. Colt and Elena entered from the west road, their steps slow, steady. Colt wore his usual ranch coat, worn but clean. Elena, in a pale blue dress with a sprig of wildflowers tucked into her braid, walked beside him. Her posture was tall, but her fingers curled tightly around the leather strap of her bag. The moment they stepped into the square, the tone shifted. It wasn't loud or obvious, but it was sharp. Voices dropped, heads turned, conversations trailed into silence, then picked up again, too quickly, too forcefully, like paper trying to cover flame. Whispers traveled like wildfire. Stares clung to Elena's back like burrs. Colt kept walking, his palm resting gently against the small of her back. A silent reassurance. But Elena felt the weight. Her spine was rigid. Her smile had disappeared. She couldn't hear the words, but she had long ago learned the language of looks. Then he stepped out from between the feed barrels. Thomas, her former fiancé, dressed sharp, clean boots, pressed vest. His posture screamed pride, but his eyes burned with something uglier. Jealousy, maybe, bitterness, or just the need to wound. He crossed the space between them with calculated slowness, the crowd parting slightly. "Well, if it isn't the rancher and his charity case," he said loudly, his voice slicing through the air like a blade. Colt stopped mid-step. Elena faltered. The square seemed to still. Thomas smirked. "How noble of you, Brenner. Taking in the town's broken doll. Real brave of you. Makes you look like a proper gentleman." A few chuckles rose from the crowd, thin, nervous. Colt turned toward him fully. "Watch your mouth." Thomas shrugged. "What? I'm just telling the truth. She can't hear it anyway. That's why you chose her, right? Easier to play the hero when your wife can't argue." Elena's jaw tightened. She couldn't catch the words, but she could read the room. The way people watched her, some pitying, some amused, none stepping forward. A voice behind them whispered, "Deaf girls belong in the kitchen, not in the square." Another followed, "What's the point in speaking if they can't understand? Waste of breath." That was when Colt stepped forward. His voice, usually low and measured, rose like thunder. "You laughed at her because she's quiet, but she's the only one who ever listened." Every sound stopped. Even the horses fell silent. He turned in a slow circle, eyes meeting the crowd. "She doesn't need to hear your voices to know who you are. You've shown her in every sideways glance, every hushed word, and yet she walks here, shoulders high, more graceful than any of you." Thomas took a step back. "You think that makes you better?" Colt didn't blink. "I don't care about being better, but I know she is." Then Elena stepped forward. She turned to face them all. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hands. Her fingers moved with precision, sharp, elegant. She signed in silence, her message as clear as any speech. "I may not hear your insults, but I see who you are." Murmurs broke like ice under pressure. She continued, signing slowly, fiercely, one hand to her chest, one to the ground. "I stand here, whole, strong, not because of your kindness, but in spite of your hatred." A woman near the bakery gasped and clutched her child tighter. A boy dropped his apple. Thomas opened his mouth, but no words came. He turned and walked away. The crowd remained still. And in that stillness, something shifted. For the first time, they didn't see a girl to be pitied, mocked, or dismissed. They saw a woman who didn't need sound to command attention, and beside her Colt stood, silent, steady, proud. He didn't have to say another word, because she had already said it all. Autumn painted the valley gold. Leaves drifted like soft fire across the hills, and the scent of cinnamon and cider curled through the town. The harvest festival was coming, a tradition older than the church bell that rang every Sunday. But this year, something felt and different. It began with a knock. Elena opened the ranch door one morning to find a boy, no older than 8, standing on the porch, straw-colored hair, wide brown eyes, hands clenched nervously around a frayed cap. His mother stood behind him, quiet. "He doesn't speak," she said gently. "And he doesn't hear. Not since he was born." Elena tilted her head. The mother hesitated. "He saw you, at the market, signing. He asked if you could teach him." Elena's chest swelled, her throat tightened. She crouched slowly, bringing her hands up. The boy's eyes lit up as she signed, "Hello, I'm Elena." His mouth curved into the softest smile. From that day on, he came every afternoon. Colt built them a bench beneath the cottonwood tree, and Elena taught with hands, drawings, laughter. The boy learned quickly. His fingers fumbled at first, but she never grew frustrated. Her patience was quiet, unyielding. Word spread. Another child came. Then a teenage girl with a brother who couldn't speak. Then a father whose wife had gone silent from grief. Soon, the townsfolk began to stop by, not to mock, but to watch, to listen, in a new way. They saw something sacred in the way Elena moved, how her hands danced with meaning, how her eyes glowed when someone understood. Then came the harvest fair. The square was alive with color, hay bales stacked high, pies lined up for judging, laughter ringing through the crisp air. Colt stood beside Elena as she watched children chase ribbons across the dirt. The mayor stepped onto the small stage at midday, clearing his throat. "We'd like to welcome a special member of our community," he said awkwardly. "Someone who sees things we've missed." He looked at Elena. "Would you say a few words?" The crowd turned. Elena froze. Then, slowly, she stepped forward. She turned to Colt, her eyes wide. He nodded, gently squeezed her hand. She lifted her fingers and signed. "You once saw me as broken, but I was never broken, just unheard. Now you're learning to listen, and that means more than I can say." She stopped, breath caught. Colt stepped beside her and spoke aloud, translating every word with a voice both steady and proud. When he finished, the crowd stood silent. Then, Someone clapped. A second. A third. And then the square erupted in applause, loud, raw, thunderous. Elena's hands trembled. Colt looked at her, his voice low. "You didn't just speak," he said. "You changed them." For the first time, Elena didn't feel like she was on the outside looking in. She felt seen. And more than that, she felt heard. Spring came early that year. Not in a burst of color, but gently, like a held breath being released. The frost melted faster than usual, and the air turned warm enough to open windows again. The earth, once hard and unyielding, softened beneath their boots. Trees whispered in budding green, and the wind carried the scent of rain and something new. For Colt and Elena, it felt like the world itself had exhaled. They packed what little they needed and moved into a smaller house on the edge of town. It wasn't grand or fancy, but it had wide windows that let in the morning light, and a porch that wrapped around the front like a hug waiting to happen. It felt honest, open. The kind of place where a life could begin, not just pass through. Out back, they cleared a patch of land. Elena knelt in the dirt, her fingers pressing tiny seeds into soil still damp from the thaw. Beside her, Colt hammered wooden posts into the ground for the fence, wiped sweat from his brow, and built raised beds with care. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. Every gesture was a word. Every look, a sentence. In the evenings, they sat on the porch steps, shoulders brushing. Together, they watched the garden stretch toward the sky, inch by inch. It became a quiet ritual, this watching, this growing. Sometimes Elena would sign something small, beautiful, hope, alive, and Colt would nod, his smile barely visible under the brim of his hat. But it wasn't just a home they were building. Beside the garden, they began to raise something else, a single-room building made of pale cedar and long windows. It was simple, with smooth floors and a door that opened wide. It would be a school. A place where silence wasn't something to fear, but something to understand. A place where children like Elena had once been, lost, unheard, could now be seen, could now belong. Every night, after supper, Colt sat near the window with a worn leather journal. Elena signed stories, pieces of herself. Her mother's hairbrush, a childhood tree, a nightmare once soothed by the stars. And he wrote them all down. He never changed her words, never filtered them through his own voice. He became her scribe, her witness. One evening, just as the sky turned to peach and the garden swayed with a gentle breeze, Colt walked toward her with something hidden in his hands. Elena knelt among the rows of green, dirt on her palms, sunlight tangled in her hair. He knelt too, not for show, not for tradition, just for truth. He unwrapped a small cloth, revealing a silver ring, polished, modest. It gleamed softly in the fading light. Elena looked at him, startled, her lips parted, a question in her eyes. He signed slowly, each movement careful. Not for duty, for love. Then quietly he spoke, his voice rough, low, and meant only for her. "I don't want the world to hear us," he said. "I just want it to see us." Elena's throat tightened. Tears came fast and full, and she nodded. Not just yes, but everything. Their second wedding was nothing like the first. It happened beneath the old cottonwood tree, where the breeze carried laughter and birdsong, a few close friends, a handful of children. No priest, no music, only the sky, and the land, and the love that had taken root in silence. Colt's hands trembled as he slipped the ring onto hers. Elena touched his face. No vows were spoken, but they had already been living them, one quiet day at a time. The meadow behind the church was filled with light. It was Founder's Day, an old tradition meant to honor the town's beginnings, but this year it meant something more. The townsfolk gathered early. Families brought picnic blankets and baskets. Children wove flower crowns. The school bell rang, not to call for silence, but to invite joy. At the center of it all stood a small wooden stage. Nothing fancy, just planks nailed together, draped with prairie flowers and bunting. Colt helped Elena up the steps, though she didn't need the help anymore. Her balance was firm, her back straight, her presence radiant. Children filed in behind her. Not all were deaf, but many were. Some had learned signing from birth. Others had found it here, with her. Their fingers fluttered like butterflies in the morning light, practicing last movements, sharing nerves. Colt stood just off stage, hands tucked into his vest, watching. Elena turned to the children, signed calmly, "Remember, it's not about being perfect, it's about being seen." They nodded, eyes wide. Then the music began. Only, it wasn't music anyone could hear. There were no violins, no drums, no piano keys. Just hands, just faces, just rhythm created by the human body and spirit. Elena stepped forward first. Her hands moved in sweeping arcs, slow and graceful. The children followed. Some swirled, some moved in place, their eyes locked on one another. It was choreography of connection, a dance built from silence. To those watching, it was unlike anything they'd seen. Every movement told a story, of fear, of isolation, of hope, of courage.